Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen. Let's dive right into it. I have a very special guest with me today, author of Becoming Glitch, my new pal, Daniel. Daniel, how's it going?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate the opportunity.
I appreciate being able to read this book. It was pretty fun. It took me back a couple of years when I really started to get into reading. It felt like I don't want to say like a young adult novel. I want to say like maybe a step or two above that, you know? Like
Oh, sure.
if you're anything like me, you were one of those guys in Barnes and Noble, just constantly being in the fiction section, bouncing back and forth between the different subgenres and things, right? Just it felt like I was grabbing one of those books. I was like, this would be really interesting to read. It looks cool. It's got a cool cover. The premise sounds really good on the back. I've got 10 books in my other arm already. It
Right,
felt like
right.
I was in one of those situations.
I'm honored. I'm so glad you liked it, and I think that categorization side has definitely been a learning experience for me because I like books. I don't think I have the best or going into writing this one, going into publishing this one, I don't think I had the best grasp of like Amazon's categorization system for like this is a you know uh paranormal young adult superhero sci-fi, like the handles that they would use on it. It's like I know the content. I like the only really superhero novel that I had read that I could semi compare it to before writing this one was the Reckoner series by Brandon Sanderson. I think that to me just kind of opened the door to realize like, wow, okay, like you can write a actual fictional story about somebody with superpowers without it being a comic book or a like you can have the gravitas of actual people who are thrust into this world or who end up in this world where superpowers exist without it being some kind of cartoony, kind of overdone sort of thing. And again, I've bumped into people who say, "Oh, superhero is really fiction or is really fantasy," and it's like, the fantasy, sci-fi, and I think some of it probably depends how you approach it. Everybody has their own take on how superpowers happen, and I think uh, part of the reason I kind of see this one as a sci-fi superhero book is that it really it's pretty much our world, without meaning to give details on location and everything, but except like with as with sci-fi, it's similar world to ours, except the premise of one thing is different. One what if happens, and so this is sort of what if people got sick and started finding out they could do things all of a sudden. And there's no explanation given. There's no, writing on the wall. There's no, sign in the sky. It's just all of a sudden people are like, why, what's happening? Uh, so anyway, I don't know if we want to go too much into, synopsis first or anything, but
Well,
um,
I had real quick. I love stories that are like that. Not just in books or comic books, but in video games too, especially. Like the first one that popped up into my head was the Metal Gear franchise because it's the same world history as us, except before World War I, you had the Wise Man's Committee, and
hmm,
that's where you have the split because they were like that the what's it called, the deep state. They're
hmm.
basically the deep state that controls all three major world powers, and it's a really, if it was made into like a huge novel, it would be so fun
Oh yeah.
to
And
read.
I think there's some about that like turning your brain into second gear when all of a sudden you're just dropped in this setting and you don't get you don't get the Star Wars intro of like war across the galaxy. You're just like, there's a ship in front of me. What technologies do we have? Where are we? What's going on? Like what are the what are the rules here? Um yeah, it does. There's hope in it. It has a good way of drawing you in.
I definitely think you accomplished that hope here. But before the book takes off, before the actual story, um, because stories and what they can do for us and how they shape our lives, uh, all of what they do being very important. You had a short dedication to your family, and that was kind of what you wrote was really meaningful to me in my own way, because I had some similarities there with my family. How are these kind of fictional stories important to you from, say, your growing up, your familial background, things like that?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, as my I think it said I forget my exact wording right off the top of my head, but my sister is the English major of the family. She actually published a couple of books like 2010 or so, and so in some ways, you know, I thought she was the, you know, kind of the more of the storyteller of it, uh, you know, growing up a little bit. But growing up, you know, for both of us, my dad would tell stories, you know, as kids. Just he was born in Texas and told us he always had a license to tell tall tales. I never completely understood that one, but ran with it. And yeah, he you know, would just, you know, we had a, you know, we'd have like a there was a painting on the wall, and he would tell us these stories about, oh, the people who lived in that house were like this. And I think just kind of gave us the, you know, you learn what's possible from the people around you and the examples that they have. And I think at some level, I think for both my sister and I think we you know, I think that showed us like, hey, you can make up stories. That's, you know, that's the thing you can do. You don't have to have a license for it. You don't have to, you know, do, you know, classes and classes and classes in order to be able to do this. Just make stuff up. That's okay. And yeah, I don't know if that's going to, if that's answering your question
It
truly, but
is. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
don't worry. It
um,
is.
yeah, I think so yeah, I think we kind of both grew up in you know, my sister and I both grew up in a house where stories were told on occasion. And yeah, it left a mark for both of us in so many words. Um, yeah, and you know, again, full credit to my sister. I have bothered her over and over again in the publishing process for this book of, you know, the grammar and the behind the scenes, the, you know, all this stuff. My spelling is terrible, so thank God for spell check. A lot of the formatting stuff was not my favorite, but again, going back to, you know, the idea is, you know, is the story, is this a story that matters to you and a story that you know, that you're interested in. And I think I put in the afterword as well, which little mini plug. The book came out in 2022. The audiobook just came out in January 2024, and I got to record the audio for the afterword myself. Um, but in that afterward, like one of the things I talked about is the realization that you have to write something that entertains you. Like if there are all these, you know, tons and tons of ideas that it would be cool if I wrote a story about this, but if I, you know, if it's not something that interests me, it's just not going to happen. So um, yeah, again, I don't want to dance around your question, you know,
No.
too far, but yeah, that's just yeah, it's a growing process.
Yeah, you're fine. Another author that pops up in my brain while you're saying this is Sly, Sylvester Stallone, because whenever he wrote Rocky, um, he's kind you're kind of echoing the reverberations of his story to me, right? Because when he wrote it, he wrote it on like in like a spiral notebook binder. He had less than two pennies to his name. He sold his dog, right? I'm pretty sure he was doing porn to make ends meet, right? He was rock bottom low, right?
Yeah,
But he wrote Rocky um, to pitch to be a movie. That was his intent from the get go, but he uh, he wrote it in such a way that it it was kind of like a conversation he was having with himself, right? It was him getting something out of himself because in his livelihood situation, not the best place to be in, right?
Sure.
Um, like he actually went back to the gas station where he sold his dog and he waited there. He kept going back there until he ran into the same person and he bought his dog back for like
Oh,
$50,000. Like it was
wow.
it's a wild story. Look into it.
Dang, I haven't heard that one. But yeah, that's awesome.
But yeah, he did the reason he's coming up in my head is because you're saying, yeah, you have to write a story that's going to speak to you, to be entertaining for you. Because if it's not, how can you expect it to do the same thing for anybody else?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
I
I
get
think
that.
oh, go for it.
Yeah, I get that a lot. Um, but in now, I always want to do these as spoiler free as possible.
Sure.
But what instantly hooked me is chapter one. Uh, our main character goes up against this Texas giant who's trying to pick a fight with him.
Yeah.
I was like, all right, I don't know where we're gonna go, but I love that we're here. I I love that this is where we start out. Um, and he's this. It's Bruce, right? He's this loud and boisterous kind of a guy. What made you make Bruce?
Oh man. It's so one of the things I've talked about, I mentioned my sister, that I've learned is both of us, there are essentially two types of writers, right? The planners who just like map everything out from the very beginning, and the pantsers who just fly by the seat of their pants and see where it goes. Apparently, both of us are the latter. Is I just tend to just start writing scenes and like, what's going to happen next? So chapter one was pretty much where I started, like not even knowing it was going to be a book, all of this stuff. I just sat down at the kitchen table one day and was like, huh, I'm gonna make a scene with the with somebody with some nerd just like
Hmm.
getting scared out of his wits, but he's still snarky against this giant. Why not? Um, and I think a lot of Bruce's I guess speech patterns and a little bit of his attitude was kind of tangentially inspired by True Grit, I think, Rooster
Hmm.
Cogburn. If you've seen the Jeff Bridges version in particular, the just surly, can't be bothered. Um, but yeah, I think that's a piece of him. I don't know if I can remember the entire because it is as I said, it's a process and a step-by-step thing. But I think the idea of this sort of immovable, again, kind of grouchy, uh, just random dude showing up who is convinced that superpowers are real and the main character, even though he has them, is not sure, if they're like what's going on. Um, yeah, it seemed I kind of again I wrote a very bare bones original version of the scene, and then as I wrote more scenes, I came back and went, you know what, I could run with this. Um, yeah, yeah, and again, the character of Bruce kind of developed over time, um, kind of from that. But originally, he was just some big dude. uh, yeah, yeah, and I could say so much more, but again, I'm watching for the spoilers here, so.
Yeah, there you go. Now, something that I kind of use Bruce as throughout the book in my first reading is a bit of an anchor of realism.
Hmm,
If that makes sense, it'll make sense to everybody else once they read it.
yep.
But there's all this other stuff going around, uh, like people with powers and some situations that they might find themselves in, and then you have Bruce. He, so that little bit of gruff, that little bit of grit, that can't be bothered attitude. It's a little bit of a refreshing anchor pull back down to uh, maybe a center of comfort, you could call it. Like some like safety tile of it's gonna be all right. Like
Hmm.
you know what I mean? Um, not explaining it very well, but I loved Bruce. I think Bruce is probably one of my favorite characters throughout the story. And you're right. It's really hard not to go into spoilers with
Yeah, I struggle with how much even just to put on the back of the book because even I figure even things like the fact that the superpowers are real, it comes out sooner or later. That's fair to say. But how much to go into and the limits behind that and the other characters who pop up, I'm trying to not give too much away, um but yeah, I will say yeah, Bruce and a character he kind of juxtaposes with, which is really interesting, just to write, just to kind of parse through about people who, and again, I think that's part of what attracted me about the whole superhero, just writing a superhero novel, was the idea that I think a lot of the time, and again, I go into this in the afterword, so I don't want to repeat too much of that, but that a lot of the time superheroes kind of are this I think they get an extra pass in the way that like if I was writing really hard sci-fi, like really, as ultra realistic as I could, I think there'd be more expectations for like, well, this you don't actually meet a person who is this, um, uh, I don't know, this set in their ways in this kind of environment or something like that, maybe. But I think for superheroes, like for me, I was able to take a sort of a theme for each character, and I think that's something that is kind of played out from the superhero genre is that it that each I don't know characters tend to like you think about like Marvel comics, for example. A lot of them you think of like Spider-Man. You know a couple of his his themes of he comes from a poor background, but he cares about the people around him. He's smart. He has like there's a couple of like core aspects that kind of make up Spider-Man. And you think of Spider-Man, you instantly know that. Like again, real life maybe tends to be more complicated, but like in superhero stories and comics, um, I think we get a little bit of that extra simplicity that I don't know, to me means that you get to take these themes that the characters have and you get to kind of explore them even as you explore the story. I don't know if that makes sense, but that so somebody like Bruce who is set in his ways, like um he is loyal to the core of like the things that he thinks are right. Like he that's end of discussion. He knows
yeah,
the path he's on and that's it. No need to adjust for it. And then to come into contrast to contrast with some of the characters you run into, it's like you both have the differences of their powers and you have the differences of the um, things that they hold dear. And so I think it's interesting to kind of explore that. Yeah, I don't know.
yeah. Uh,
Again,
yeah. No, I'm on the same page here. Of the same book, I think. So something else that I think has become a a trend in a good way is we have kind of evolved in the past 10-15 years from stories like this um, being like Harry Potter. I don't know if you've read the Charlie Bone books,
that's
um,
not.
but it's kind of like Harry Potter. But it's the main characters and they're stumbling about and they're you're a wizard, Harry. But that's like later on in the ending of the first third that they find out that they're important for some reason that's
Hmm.
still not too clear to them. They have an ability, they have a power, there's a special connection to this, that, or the other thing. But here in Becoming Glitch and in a couple of other um, modern works of fiction, like I said, over this has evolved over the past 10-15 years. That's where we start, is the ending of that first third. We know they're important. Here's probably why,
Hmm.
right? Um, we don't have to we can cut out the fluff that's at the beginning. We don't need this long overture introduction
Hmm.
anymore. Um, That's one reason I think um, stories like Star Wars that came out in '77 were a bit ahead of their time. Dune as well, because they didn't have so much of that fluff at the beginning. It was, here's the rebellion, here's the empire, that giant robot samurai, that guy's the bad guy. All right.
Right, right,
Like you know the stakes immediately. Here we go. Because
right,
you want to, as an author, I imagine you want to be like, here's this world that I'm making. Here's every detail about everything. And I want you to be able to appreciate it. But I know you cannot sit there and read 4,000 pages. So
right,
let me figure out what to delineate from, what to whittle down, what to exclude, and what to include to make a 457-page book. Um, and I think that it's a good direction. It's not necessarily bad that we had the previous setup, and I read a lot of John Grisham, so
all right,
this that's something that Grisham does quite a bit. Um, is have that fluff for the first like 10 chapters of his books.
sure,
Um, but with this, with a lot of other uh, things like it, uh, another thing that popped in my head really quickly was My Hero Academia. Uh, Immediately starts off where we need to be for the relevancy of the story. We don't have to go into the main
yeah,
characters' uh, backstory, their family life. That all that can become details later on.
sure,
We don't have to have something set up to be, say, a a plot device of consequence for later on, right? Like we don't have to be like, there's a missile heading for Third Street, mother, you know,
yeah,
like we don't. It's no, it could just be that a missile is about to kill some people on Third Street. That's all we need.
right,
All right. That extra bit of like personalized dire is fine, but it's not going to change what the hero has to do. It's not going to change like the impact on the surrounding world if he fails. It'll
mhm,
change him because his mom died, but uh, you know the difference might be completely situational. But yeah, whole point is there's no fluff to this book. It's something I really appreciate. We get right into it, and the fact that you did it with a Texas Giant, just like I said, it hooked me instantly.
I'm so glad. That was awesome to hear always, and yeah, yeah, I'm glad too. Like I said, Bruce was a kick to create, and then continue to develop over time. And again, I don't, you know, it, um, writing the book. I mean, this is something like I said, and I wasn't doing it, full time. And for yeah, I started the initial kind of beginnings of what would eventually become the book like in 2015, I think, which feels like forever ago. And I was doing full time work at the time, and that would be come home, and with the 10 brain cells I had free, it was just kind of write a paragraph maybe or something like that, and iterate and iterate and iterate, and again, I for the longest time I did not see it actually. Publishing was just a pipe dream way off in the future. And even just completing a story out of it, I think a lot of it was just something that, like, I was entertained enough to keep plugging away at. But and it only was, I think, a couple months before I finally got to the point of I told myself, kind of coming out of COVID, this is something that I could do when I retire, or it's something I can do right now, just as opportunities arose. And it was only, I think, about 3 months or so before I actually published the paperback edition, where I started to really believe that I was actually going to publish this book. I think, and So anyway, I'm so glad you
Hmm.
enjoyed it from the get-go.
And I'm 100% certain that your audience does, my audience will, and everybody in between. Speaking of which, is there a specific kind of audience that you want to hope to reach?
Sure.
Um, and do you think that there was an audience that you were writing for in particular whenever you would come back to it, uh, off and on, like you said,
Yeah,
because you're a seat of the pants kind of author, right? You're not making outlines and charts and doing all
sure.
these like research models or whatever. So did you have anyone in particular in mind when you were going through characters and chapters and events, or was it like, you know what, this would be really stinking cool if this
Yeah.
happened?
I want to say a bit of both, probably. As I said, some of it is I had to write something that I would get a kick out of, but some of it is, um, I think I wanted to write a dual purpose kind of book. Is that I wanted something where if you just go for the action adventure, the quirky physics and the just interesting characters, you will leave entertained and just have a enjoy the book. But a lot of it kind of behind the scenes is, there is kind of that double meaning of becoming Glitch, of him, his journey into figuring out this hero persona that he's trying to figure out, trying to decide if he even wants to be. Um, and also what that means for the main character, for Andy as a person, of it's his development not just to create this alter ego, but the actual main character who, you know, his journey from the character he is at the beginning of the book, who is um, not the kind of person to risk sacrificing something that or well anything really for the sake of somebody else, to the end where I'm not going to spoil it, but where he has harder decisions that he's confronted with. And a lot of it is about that journey, I think, kind of again behind the scenes. Um, and yeah, I think I've struggled to put my finger exactly on like this is the target reader. This is the perfect example of the person I would want to read it. But I think um, I listened to a webinar sometime back that talked about demographics versus psychographics. That the idea of a demographic is like, I wrote this for a 18 to 24-year-old male who is, college educated and blah, 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 who has like all these specific characteristics, versus a psychographic of somebody who, like, these are their interests. This is somebody who thinks about, who cares about, developing their identity, or finding purpose in their life, or something to that effect. And so um, it's somewhere in between there. I think it probably tends towards a male audience. It probably tends towards your you know young adult or so. I hope it is engaging to anyone who would take a look at it. But I think in particular, a lot of it has to do with, yeah, again, identity formation and kind of uh, yeah, growing leadership is another theme that kind of growing into that. And so I think people who are interested in those themes, if they stick with the book, they might not be obvious at the very beginning, but as the story progresses, it kind of explores some of these things as well as the action adventure. Uh,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. Well, Daniel, I gotta tell you, uh, get ready for the internet forums to tell you you're part of the problem if you're writing for a male audience.
yeah, yeah,
No,
yeah,
I
yeah.
I think I think a staple of a great story is you can change certain characteristics about a side character here and there, and the story still works. The
Hmm.
story's fine, right? You could make what would be a a good example. You could make maybe Han Solo a chick, right? And the story still works for the most part, right? Still made the Kessel Run, still friends with the
Yeah,
giant
yeah,
walking carpet, right?
yeah,
Still got this old piece of junk, right? This
yeah,
this
yeah,
uh Dodge Dart that he's got a like Cadillac engine in,
yeah, yeah.
you know, it's the story still works,
Right.
right? Now, on the flip side of that coin, what might make that same great story still stick is you can't change anything about the main characters
Hmm.
because the story becomes different,
Hmm.
right? If let's say Star Wars um trades places, right? We have Luke being brought up on Alderaan, we have Leia being brought up on Tatooine,
Hmm.
right? Now they're not only are their upbringings going to be different, but because of who they are and their personality types and
Hmm.
all the rest, right? Their situations are going to be different, right? Um, you might have to rewrite how Luke becomes involved with the Imperial Senate, and maybe he becomes a little bit more of an imperialist rather than a
Sure.
revolutionary, right? Uh, maybe Leia has like a much stronger sense of family, so she's like, you know what, Unc, I'm fine with staying on the farm. You guys are getting older, you're getting along more in years. You need the help. You're right. I'll
It's
stick it
not
out for
impossible that they'd end up in the same, end of the story maybe, but it would be a very, very different journey to get there.
yeah.
Yeah.
But and we see the kinds of what ifs, and what ifs are fun. What ifs are a ton of fun. I love what ifs. Um, I mean, most modern fiction is based off of what ifs, right? Like, what if there was a ring that you could harness your will through and it made you green and you could manifest swords out of your willpower? Like, what if zombies were a thing? And what if they came about this way? Right?
Right.
That's what almost all modern literature, and I say modern, it's covers about the last 150, 200 years. Um, it has some kind of hand in the formation of the fiction, right? Of whatever story you're writing. So
Sure.
that's
And I mean,
I
just to riff off of that I think one of the interesting things about sci-fi is that some of the technologies that we have now come from the same, some what if, sometimes inspired by somebody's story. I mean, Jules Verne and the whole, what industrial revolution, what ifs they had, like, oh yeah, submarines, like, not to say he was the first one to make this, but the idea of just pushing, like, I think, well, one of them, I don't think it was Jules Verne, but somebody talked about, like, oh, we could get to the moon by train. It's like, okay, some of the ideas didn't work, but the author didn't know it, or the writers from whatever that was didn't know that we would eventually get to the moon. They didn't have the technology that we do now, but the ideas that they had, the kind of reflections on what was possible. Their methods might not have been right, but the stuff that they put out that, like, this might be a possibility in the future, kind of in its own way influences what the future ends up being. So um, yeah, yeah, it's pretty cool.
yeah, the real life influences and the real life results from science fiction are palpable. I mean, Star Trek had iPads and Skype and smartwatches, right? They had all that stuff in the 60s. I mean, you can't tell me that one of the most innovative genres out there for that's just like this birthplace of what could be real isn't science fiction. I think it's probably, and this is for my own sake. Um, I think one of the best remaining um, what's the best thing to call it? The best remaining schools of thought, the best remaining areas of creativity and imagination uh, towards practical application is science fiction.
Mhm.
Uh, I'm not remembering my history well, but it was the it was the guy that invented um, what eventually became um, the MRI, the
Huh.
MRI machine that scans your body. He had originally purposed that technology for something completely different.
Huh.
It was for communications purposes. He wanted to be
Huh.
able to send communications via these radiation waves
Huh.
from one place to another. And they realized, oh, we can use these signals and use this radiation to identify things across bodies of matter. Could you see under people's skin with this? Oh, you can. All right, cool. We're going to measure bones and make sure you don't have skull fractures. And that's how the MRI came about.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
So,
I think the again the theme kind of like with not knowing the method, like for getting to the moon. But you know, sometimes we don't know what we've made either. And for sure it's like um just stemming from that question of what if what if we could harness these radio waves to communicate, and maybe it's not the kind of communication we imagined, but it's still transmitted, or it's still resulted in data that we didn't have before. Uh, so yeah, that's awesome.
yeah, I think we lose perspective on a day-to-day basis because if you take what we're doing right now 1,000 years backwards, we're wizards, dude.
It's
Like
so true.
where there's a metallic square screen in front of my face that's got glass on it and a whole bunch of precious metals and minerals inside of it, and I'm using it to speak to somebody 10, 12, 15 hours away from me, hundreds of miles. Which I wizard.
Yeah,
This is magic. This is clearly
no,
magic,
absolutely.
right?
And even, I mean, again, speaking from stories, it's like you think of how many. I mean, what was I thinking about? There was some spoof on Star Wars a while ago that was talking. I think it was some simplified recapping of the first episode and talking about how they go on this epic adventure to, you know, transmit the Death Star plans to the rebels, and somebody said, and if you think about it, like that entire thing could have been done with one email. Uh, once they had the files, and it's like, but there was absolutely no conception of an email at the time, and so both the technology that they imagined, some of which has influenced the real world, and some of which they had absolutely no concept of that we have, and then we take for granted because we've gotten used to it. But it's so true. It is amazing to have, and yeah, again, it's like I think it's easy for us to forget that yeah, 100 years ago. I mean, not only would it probably have been seen as I don't know, or 200 or whatever, witchcraft or, just magic straight up. But yeah, I mean, just so much of people's daily lives would have been, was absolutely flipped upside down by the stuff that we use all the time. So it's, yeah, it's crazy.
Absolutely. I like to. It's gonna sound so like early college uh, quartz collector girl of me, right? But I like to align myself with the idea that magic is just technology we haven't really figured out yet.
Hmm.
Because if I took my phone, right, it is a brick of metal and glass and rubber, and I took it to somebody 200 years ago, and I said, "This is a phone. I can talk to people who aren't here on it." And they're like, "Okay, how does that work? How do you do that?" Ah, well, there's a phone signal that goes into space, and mm, yeah, I don't know, dude. It's
Yeah,
magic. It's magic.
yeah,
I don't know. It's magic, right? Now, there are people out there that can tell you exactly how everything works in a phone. That's 2% of the population, maybe.
yeah,
So it's not that necessarily where you and I and everybody else who doesn't understand how exactly how a cell phone works are dumb, right? Or it's not that we don't understand how to use it. We know it's technology, but apropos of any of the daily comforts around us, we would look at this and just be astounded, like for days, with what you could do with it, right? Because it is magic, right? So I think magic is just technology that's running wild, and we haven't exactly capsulated it. We haven't uh, put it in a nice, neat, defined box, you know?
yeah, yeah. No, it's that middle ground of understanding, but yeah, just that middle ground of understanding of we don't always know how stuff works, and I think as technology gets more and more specialized, it's more and I've worked a little bit with so as I said, my sister is the English major in the family. I did an engineering degree, and I was did some work with semiconductor stuff on like the making the components that go in computers. And if that tells me anything, it's that I don't know if there's anybody out there who if has all the understanding necessary to be able to be able to build a cell phone themselves. If you dropped them off in the Middle Ages and said go nuts, make a phone, or cell phone specifically out of nothing, even if they knew all the metallurgy and the you know all of this stuff. I mean, the amount of tiny steps needed. I mean, in order to you know to get and process semiconductor material, to make a circuit, to all this stuff. It's like I don't know if there's any one person in existence at this point who could do every step of that without having a ton of infrastructure in place, who knows all the pieces. And so at some point we do. We just kind of have to, plug what we do know into the black box of stuff that people who have gone before us have made. And I don't know, we trust that it works, and then we take it for granted a lot of the time.
Yeah,
Um,
just it's magic, man.
yeah.
um, now there are some choice and I think some fun names in becoming glitch, right? Like there's Sig, Glitch, obviously Claws, amongst others. What importance do these names carry for a story like this one, or for stories in general, right? Because you have things like Game of Thrones, where everybody has like John, son of this guy from here. This is his grandfather. He's got this sword. There's all of these descriptor pronouns that are following his first name, right? But that's everybody in the story. So what kind of importance do you think names carry in stories like Becoming Glitch?
Yeah, oh, that's a good question. I think part of it for me, what was I didn't want to copy a bunch of names from other people. DC and Marvel have both been going for so long. I didn't want to make, Daredevil or, Wolverine or, any of these names that we know so well, or even trying as much as possible to steer away. I will say there's a character called Crimson. And a little behind the scenes is originally he was named Bloodshot. And then I found out they made a movie called Bloodshot about I think he's a Marvel character originally. And realized like, and I don't think the term is copyrighted, but I still didn't want to make it feel like one. And so, this is what I get for working on the book for so long is, realizing I needed to adjust that. But I think hero names in particular are interesting because you're trying to kind of encapsulate a lot of so much of a character in a name that they choose for themselves. So somebody like Glitch, again, without spoiling, is it has to do with what he does, with what he comes to understand that he can do. But it also, um, you could say it reflects his take on that too, as you could have called him, Freeze or something like that, but that really wasn't his personality to come up with something that was as um, I guess definitive of that. He is a little bit of a you know computer dork, I guess, in some ways, and so something like Glitch um, is something that would resonate with him a little bit more. Sig, as we've said, and kind of surly, really wasn't somebody who was going to spend hours and hours and hours on, thinking of the perfect, hero name for himself. And so, when Glitch kind of tosses him this idea of this is something you could call yourself, he goes, sure, I like it. We'll take it. And yeah, other characters, again, I don't want to go into too much of it, but I think both reflecting on what they can do and then some take on it from their personality and who they are. Um, it's a mix of there's this part of me that wants to be able to say that this is the perfect name for a character to completely nail, uh, you know, that there's no possible better way of describing this character. And it's probably not true. And at some point, I just needed to pick like this is the name that they have. But um, all that to say, yeah, I think there's a lot of importance to it. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
and I don't know if there's just one way, but it does it kind of plays back into a lot of who they are over time.
Yeah, I would kind of like to see a a middle ground story with the names. Um, maybe like a Friends version, right? Where everyone's just got some normal names, but they could be the most like important character. They could be the titular character, right? Um, I guess Harry Potter is kind of that way. I mean, it's just a guy named Harry, right? That guy's Ron. Okay, cool. Um, but then you have names like Cerberus. Like, all right, that's a bad guy, right? Come on,
Right.
okay, he's fine. He's not. Whatever. Um, so maybe not Harry Potter, but yeah, definitely Friends. Where it was, hey, Rachel, hey, how's it going? Like, you're not gonna be important, are you? Are you a throwaway character? Oh no, you're here for all the seasons. You're here forever. Oh, okay. All right, cool. I want to see a story with that. It's just like middle ground neutral names because if you go too much into it, then it becomes farce and like
Sure.
you start to really play into it. Like, who's the guy? Keith? Oh, who's watch out for Keith.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's the like main over the top big bad villain. His name's just Keith.
And I do think kind of riffing off of that too is one of the interesting things with the superhero name things where people come up with their alter ego names is you get to see that juxtaposition of you know, this is Andy. He's just some dude named Andy. It's like if there was no Glitch, if you didn't know anything about him, nothing about that would scream that he is, this guy is destined for greatness, any of that. And in picking that, like I said, that whole theme of the Glitch alter ego and him kind of growing into that and wrestling with that, is and there are a couple parts as we've talked about Glitch and Bruce, um, where something I toyed with a little bit was even how they refer to themselves and to others is when does Glitch start to think of Bruce as Sig, not just in the presence of others, but when does he start to think of him as that as they grow into these kind of alter egos they create? And I think I have now that I've published the book, I've been reading other books in the genre, and I know what there is Crystal Bain's Seabee's Bones trilogy, which I thought was very very well done, a lot grittier than mine, but very well written. But it's sort of the whole superhero school um, kind of growth, and you see these characters are mostly introduced with just a bunch of normal names, and as they continue through their program they start to come up with their superhero names, and you can kind of see them growing these um growing into these hero roles that they are aspiring to fill. So it's an interesting, I mean, kind of going off of what you said with um in the case where people choose their names and choose this other version of themselves. Um, you can kind of see the growth of the character from what they call themselves. It's just I don't know, an interesting aspect specifically of the genre.
Yeah, keeping with the heroes, the superheroes here. Um, we've kind of always had superheroes,
Hmm.
as far as human history kind of goes, right? With early mythos, the Epic of Gilgamesh, first story ever. Well, they say it's the first story ever recorded and taken down by man, and that's a pretty darn good story, right? Epic of Gilgamesh. If you haven't read it out there, definitely required reading. Um,
The Iliad.
oh yeah, the Iliad, the Odyssey, all that kind of good stuff. So we've had superheroes take form from human imagination as long as we've been able to scribe, right? To sit around a campfire and harsh out some good yarns, right? So, what do you think is the necessity of superheroes and how they help shape, say, our societal moral and ethic landscapes? Like what we all agree on morally and ethically.
Yeah, no, excellent. Great question, I think. And again, I think I touched on this in the afterword, and I will say it better then than I probably will manage now. But um, I think again, superhero stories kind of I completely agree. Like I think they in some ways they carry on some of the kind of morality stories in some ways that have you go back to the ancient Greeks to all of this stuff. It's just like you take this person who kind of embodies this ideal. Your Achilles, your whatever, this pinnacle of you know of some kind of ability, of some kind of power, but also this pinnacle of some kind of value of something. The warrior spirit, the wise mentor, the whatever it is, and you put them in a box and you see how they interact with each other. And I think it's a story often repeated in some ways, like because the same themes keep coming up over and over and over again in human history, but I think it's important for us to be able to figure those out for ourselves, to see that, to see like you know what happens when if Glitch were to never grow beyond this kind of self-serving college kid that he starts out as, what would happen to the people around him? What kind of life would he miss out on? And for ourselves, not in a, I think part of it is part of the awesome side of the superhero stories is that they're not meant to be soapbox sermons. Like they're meant to be entertaining, such that we're actually willing to consider the lessons that they had because it's a fun story. Um, but but it also can make us think in a way that a sermon or a whatever would not be, just would be too boring for a lot of us to just want to listen to. But I think, yeah, I think it um, it's kind of a moral playground in some ways, where it just lets us think like, hey, you know, um, you have these people who stand for these different things. The bad guy in the book, like, what would happen if he won? Is that a world I would want to see? Like, okay, well, that's probably bad then. If I don't like that, then that's the kind of value that I probably don't want to foster in my own life, kind of thing. And not everybody's gonna think down that path. And again, I hope it's a fun story, regardless on if people want to think on that or not. But I think that's kind of a role that superhero stories have continued to play, like we said, for a long, long time. Um, so uh, yeah, I get a kick out of that side for sure. Uh,
Yeah, definitely. Um, and I think we develop stories that we naturally want to have a hierarchy of what we consider to be like pinnacles of these kinds of stories, right? There's a reason that we all remember Greek and Roman mythos, right?
hmm,
Zeus, Ares, Poseidon, Thermopylae in the
sure,
300, Prometheus, Iopides, all these kinds of good things, right? So, uh, modern literature has a little bit more of a tumultuous landscape because there's so much more of it, right? There's
sure,
thousands of authors just in the US, right? To say nothing of Europe, Asia, Russia, Africa. There's tens of thousands of authors,
sure,
potentially millions, right?
yeah,
Ranging from everything from like just a short story here and there to George R. R. Martin's compendium or J.R. Tolkien or whoever that's writing billions of pages. Um, so I think what not a lot of people are wanting to do now, because we kind of haven't done it up until now, I don't think, is I don't think that we collectively, as an audience, have really pointed to something and said, "This is a bad story. This is just trash. This is garbage. This is awful." You definitely see it everywhere now. See it a lot more now with the advent of the internet, right? I can't tell you how many YouTubers I see just rail against almost everything that comes out in pop culture nowadays, right?
yeah,
But then you have to figure out, all right, how much of that is for rage clicking to, get them business, to get them likes and subscribers and everything, and how much of it is actually real. Then there's the rub. There's no way to know, right? So I think that's why it's starting to like the real bit of it of us as an audience coming out and saying collectively, nah, this is just not it, man. It's not it, bro. Because if something is going to be made like Becoming Glitch, where it does take a whole bunch of tedious work and effort, and there's clearly an immense amount of thought put into it, even if by your own admission, there's not too much preparation work going in, right? But there is like a bunch of rewrites and like things to you're doing the work to make everything else flow cohesively and to make a really good and comprehensive narrative. Um, and there are things, and I'm trying to be nice here. There are because there's things popping into my head of what's just absolute garbage nowadays.
yeah, yeah,
Um, where we can dissect a story, we can pull apart what is it, what's the overarching philosophy, what are the characters representing? What are the themes and the elements? How are they clashing? How are they fitting together? And some things just fall apart. Some things are just god awful. Um, One of the things that I'm um, kind of biting my foot in order to watch later is going to be the Acolyte.
Yep.
And I say that because of the writing team's track records that have been producing all of this stuff. Because as I don't know if you could tell, but huge Star Wars fan, right?
I
This
I
is my
figured with the Sci-Fi Unchained channel, it wouldn't be a huge surprise.
yeah. My first memories of being a person are watching Star Wars, right? Um, I'm one of those guys that has all the books, right? Played all the games. I have annual rewatches on May the 4th, right? A whole 9 yards. Um, and I've noticed across uh channels like mine that are really more conversationalists and hobbyists, not people that are out there to make a buck off of it, but that just want to, you know,
Sure.
have a chat about it. Everybody between those guys and say Star Wars Theory, who has like 5 million subscribers or in followers, who do make a business out of it. Um, Everybody in between kind of agrees to a point that what's been produced over the past almost 15 years it's just not it. It's on one level or another. It's it becomes subpar. Like it used to be amazing and great before the acquisition, but now no, no, no.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. Was similar. I don't claim to have read all of the Star Wars books, being enough of a literalist, but I grew up loving the original shows, and I remember seeing the prequel trilogy in theaters, and um, just yeah, playing the games and everything. And I hear you. Not to cut you off, but just that yeah, that it does feel like there's been a change in the um it's almost the love of the content, maybe. I don't know if that's the best way to describe it, but I think um, and I mean, as a kid, I remember, seeing the spaceships flying around and the ingenuity of just like I remember the X-wing and the Y-wing and the wings unfolding and the A-wing and all the different the different designs there. Like I said, this is where the engineering side came from, I think, in some ways, and maybe in some ways was informed by it, kind of like we were discussing with sci-fi. It's just that it was a lot of room to dream of just like what could be. And every time a new spaceship showed up, every time a new world showed up, it was just this amazing new realm of possibility. Um, and it was almost like it was this cool setting in which, the characters played their part, but it was like you get the feeling that there's just so much more out there. And you're only seeing this exciting little piece of it, and there could be these implications from what happens with the empire that we don't even know of, and what could it mean, and there was a lot of room to dream in. And I don't know, it does feel like now it's you know mining sounds like I don't know, the right term for it, that it's like it's being mined for its content, like like a oil well or something, of just trying to see what can be extracted from it. And it doesn't have the same like, oh, what if, like, wow, what if I wonder, I just want to spend my spare time thinking about this character. And what if they'd gone down this different path? And what if they'd gone to this different world? What might have happened then? It's just like on to the next episode, on to the new franchise, on to the new um I don't know. It's um I might have cut you off before you had your full question in there. So sorry if I jumped out too quick.
No, no.
Uh,
I think you're hitting it the nail on the head here. I've figured out what my main gripe is, and that's there are no more wars in Star Wars. You
Hmm.
know, the second word of the title of the franchise, and we don't have it. We have. I think the Acolyte is going to be like this mystery thriller show, from what
Hmm.
I've read, and cool, sounds great with Force users, and there's a creepy guy with a smile helmet.
Yeah.
Okay, um, where's the spaceship battles? Where's the armies in space? Like, what? Give me a war, right? Like,
Yeah.
give me what you promised me in the title. Like, this is a big reason why kids like me who grew up with the comics and the all the other books and everything, that's why we're frustrated. It's because we grew up with Star Wars, having like reading all of the other conflicts and actual wars that went on after the movies, right? The biggest one is like this war with an entire race of beings called the Yuzhang Vong.
Hmm. I
And
remember. Yeah.
yeah, and they come from outside of the galaxy, and their entire race is so evil that the Force has cut them off,
Hmm.
right? The Force is supposed to be in everything from like rocks, trees, plants, animals. An entire race of beings is so evil. The Force is like, no. So Jedi are kind of useless against them. They can't use the Force on them. They can't fling them, throw nothing. They can't choke them,
Yeah.
read their minds, nothing. So the Jedi are like, oh, how do we fight these things? Right? And all of their technology is uh, bioengineered, so their guns are alive, their spaceships are alive, right? They have blaster proof armor. They have armor that can deflect lightsabers. Like this is a terrifying, and they detail capturing people in the galaxy and in like turning them into slaves by implanting spores and things into them and mutating them. And it's grody, and
Yeah.
like the consequences are super real and in your face. And Chewie gets a moon dropped on him. Like that's how Chewie dies in this and it's like 19 books. And that's just one story.
Right.
There's dozens of these. So yeah, those all had war and conflict and huge consequences and death, and it was amazing. And now we got mystery thrillers.
Yeah. Uh, not. I don't want to catch up. Yeah. But just I think going off of that, I think one of the things that I really kept running into even with yeah, with writing this book, for example, was um, you know, you need a powerful villain or some kind of strong opposition for a book or a story to be interesting. And I think that really might be I don't know, maybe the biggest stumbling block I think of the new trilogy, the quote unquote new trilogy, the sequel trilogy with was that I think yeah the villain from episode 7 from episode 8 never really understood particularly who he was, who they were. They just kind of popped up, and I wasn't sure kind of following episode 6 and the kind of seemingly climactic tie-in. It was just okay. There's this first order that just appeared. Who are they? I mean, okay, yeah, supposedly the remnants of the empire, but why should we worry? It seems like they got pretty destroyed. And previously, it seems like the Republic, I assume, is set up now again. Um, you know, what do they have? Oh, they have the Star Killer base now. They just blew up half the planets. Okay, well, where did that come from? So it's not really clear what driving force they have that makes them so powerful. And then, having Kylo Ren get his butt kicked in the end of 7 didn't make him feel like a very threatening force, threatening villain. Episode 8, you had that little bit of Snoke being, of having super strong, force sensitivity. And then all of a sudden he was gone and still really didn't understand who he was or where he came from. And then episode 9, I don't even know if I need to get started of, somehow the Emperor has returned. Of and I think again, I think that's part of just storytelling in general is if people, if you write a good story, people will be willing to go with the rules you make for it. Game of Thrones. It's like I think part of the reason that people are so enthralled is like you had this fantasy, but like largely medieval fantasy. You didn't have wizards on every street corner, doing crazy magic that alters the world. You had a pretty understandable world with a lot of powerful forces in it vying for power. Um, and like if and I think again it set up enough of a context in that people really were interested, really didn't know what was going to happen next, and it was an interesting ride to be along to see, who's gonna make what move to change the course of the world. If somebody had all of a sudden shown up in a spaceship, you know, maybe it would have a little shock value, but most people would turn around and leave the show after that, I'm pretty sure, because you have this set of rules for the world you've created, and if you start to break those rules, unless you have a really cool explanation for it that makes sense for the world you've created, people are going to walk away. And I think that's kind of what Star Wars has kind of been, scooting along, is to have, or I think that was the um, challenge with the sequel trilogy was the lack of clear and powerful villains, and then breaking rules in order to try and up the stakes. Um, Maybe that was a bit of a monologue, but I hear you with the frustration of loving Star Wars and then being less and less impressed.
Yeah, I definitely think that's one of the issues, is not having a clear cut evil force that you have to fight against. Otherwise, it's curtains, right? For everybody. Um, and I think this is attributed to the writers, the showrunners, the execs running things, and it kind of bleeds through into the writing a lot because you have in episode 7, all right, they have this star killer base, it blows up all these planets, so the seat of government for the new republic is now destroyed. Okay, I didn't get to make any kind of connection
Right.
to the people running it or any representatives. Like, I haven't been there. Like, I don't care that you blew up these planets that we've never been to, we've never seen. We don't know anything about the new republic. We know nothing. uh and if the new republic is just like those 5 planets, okay, this is a big galaxy, dude. Like, to me, you're just killing off a small faction. Like, that's it's really weird. And then in the Andor series, we get to see some, no, was it the Andor series or the Mandalorian, where, oh no, it was the Mandalorian where I forget his name, but it's the actor from Mr. Kim's Convenience Store. He goes to like this bureaucrat, be like, hey, there's all these pirates and Imperials, and they're on this planet Navarro and in that system, and we gotta go get them. And the bureaucrats are like, no, no, they haven't accepted New Republic citizenship yet, so it'd be too
Sure.
messy, be too much red tape and all that. So the New Republic is a bunch of dicks. Like, you're not making a good case for me to root for them in the first place. So you have this kind of wish-washy villain, and then you have the opposing side not really be sympathetic at all either. So you kind of leave me
Right.
not really caring what happens because the consequences don't matter.
No,
Why wouldn't I walk away from that story?
I think, I think you hit the nail on the head, and I think that, maybe it's a good spot to wrap up on, but is it's just in a word, it's connection. It's just that, if we, you know, if like I said, the whole Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings thing is that if there is a world, if there is a story structure that you want to take it on its own terms and you connect with it and you start to believe the story and you're rooting for Jon Snow, you're rooting for Luke Skywalker, and all of a sudden you turn the page and they totally change the character on you. It's kind of a betrayal. It's not even something happens to them. It's that this character that I connected with, all of a sudden I don't, and I don't trust the writer anymore because they you know this character I thought I understood was fundamentally different than I thought they were written. And again, I think I know a lot of criticism has been made of Rey in the past, and just with the that and not just her, but I think in general for the writing that if a character is too powerful, is too perfect, doesn't struggle enough, we don't connect with them because we are not perfect. Us, the reader, never has everything going perfectly, and never, we have to struggle with our day-to-day lives. And I think when we see that reflected in Luke failing and Luke, getting his hand cut off and rushing into something when his mentor said not to, and then, paying for it, like maybe not as epically, but
Hmm.
we have those situations in our lives where we try to do something, we run in too fast, and we fail at it, or whatever the case may be. We make mistakes and we learn from them. When we see characters that are in interesting settings that do that, we can empathize, we can connect. When they are perfect and all they need to know is have everybody around them tell them that they're perfect, great, but that's not something that happens in my day-to-day life.
Yeah.
That's not something that I connect with. And so it's just kind of, okay, great. Well, have fun being perfect. I'm going to go find a different show or story that actually connects to me a little bit more. Um, so um, I hear you, man. Yeah. And I thought maybe even just kind of going back to the thing we talked about, villains and everything too. I brought up just a clip from the afterword, if that's okay to just read over.
Sure.
Um, was that this is talking about superhero stories specifically, but again, I think some overlap with just stories that entertain us in general. Is that they reach out to us as mentors in the sense that against the backdrop of sometimes oversimplified heroes, they bring increasingly complicated villains. They set personifications of different values into conflict, and then let us watch as they test out what might happen when one worldview clashes with another. Um, and it's just that idea that we learn from heroes we can connect with, and we and we learn from villains that they're faced off against. That's how they grow, and in some ways, that's how we grow too. If not a physical villain, then something that we have to deal with in life. I think that's a lot of what kind of we learn from stories, whether or not we realize it. So, uh,
Yeah, and those are some very poignant thoughts, I think, to end on. Daniel, thank you so much for coming on. I think we could both go on just slinging nerd stuff for hours. Where could people
absolutely.
get your book, man?
Thanks for asking. Thank you again for having me on. It's been a pleasure. Amazon at the moment is the place to go. I will mention I am cranking away at book two, and toying with ideas of where I can post it, but Amazon is probably the good default. So, Becoming Glitch, Amazon. You can find my author website. I'm posting updates about what I have on book two so far, and I hope you enjoy it. Thanks for all the feedback on it.
Yeah, I look forward to it, um, and look forward to talking to you about it as well. But for today, that is all the time we have, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. Stick around for more Sci-Fi Unchained. But for now, live long and prosper, my friends, and may the Force be with us all.